All right, so Trey Lyles asks, is Islam a religion of peace? It is a religion of peace if you're Islamic. But if you're not, then it's a religion of conquest and slavery and murder. Islam means submission. If you submit to Islam, you got nothing to worry about. Although you're constantly called to jihad. If you pray to Mecca 5 times a day, and if you wash according to their standards, and if you eat the halal food, and if you follow the instructions on how to beat your wife, and if you are ready to murder your daughter because she was raped by your uncle and dishonored the family, and if you're ready to do all these other things, then you can live in peace in Islam. But if you don't believe in these things, then Islam is a religion of war. It's a religion of conquest. It's a religion of... Islam is not a religion, just a religion. It is unique in the world, in my opinion. I think it's unique in the world that it is not just a religion, it's also a state, and it's also a belief system. It's an instruction manual for how to live your daily life, and so on. So, if you are Islamic, then you are in the house of submission, and life is peaceful. And if you're not, then you must be converted or killed. I'm not making this up, I'm not making this up. I'm not putting the words in people's mouths. That's what the book says, okay? To the degree that people ignore the book, I think that's wonderful, but that's what the book says. And it doesn't just say it in one place. Like I said, there's one line in the Old Testament in Leviticus that talks about homosexuality, but that is not what the Quran is. I've read the Quran, and let me tell you something, folks. It's unreadable. It is not filled with allegorical stories and beautiful tales and things of like the prodigal son it's an instruction manual. Here's how you handle the conquest. Here's how you can lie to the enemy. It's appalling. It's appalling. I'm going to just get to this real quick because I don't want to forget it. It's just an interesting little sideline. We did 3 trifectas on Paris, and they were great. Posted one yesterday, posting one tomorrow, and I think all of them were just terrific. And I asked Scott Ott about this. He's such a great guy. He's a brilliant guy. And I said, Scott, let me ask you. You're a very religious guy, and you have a very profound understanding of the Constitution and the founders. So, let me ask you a question. Does an American Muslim, a U.S. citizen, does an American Muslim have the right to call for Sharia? Is that part of his First Amendment rights, or is it sedition? What is it? And Scott is just so profound. He said, no, they absolutely have the right to call for Sharia. That speech is protected in the way that any other speech is protected. They don't have the right to implement Sharia. There is a pathway for them to implement Sharia, said Scott Ott. And he says the way that they can do it is they have the right to say, we want Sharia. Sharia is antithetical to the First Amendment. And Scott said, so what they would have to do is they'd have to have an amendment to the 28th Amendment to repeal the First Amendment. And if you could repeal the First Amendment politically, they have a right to call for that. I thought that was a profoundly good answer. I thought that was America in a nutshell. And then after I drove home, I said, Scotty, no. And it was a question on the fly. But then I said, no, and I'm surprised he didn't catch it. Because frankly, you can't repeal the First Amendment. It's not a question whether you can do it politically or not. You can't repeal the First Amendment because the First Amendment is not repealable. The First Amendment was not... The right to free speech and freedom of thought and religion is not given to us by the First Amendment. And so the First Amendment can't take it away. Those rights existed before we were born. These rights existed. They're the natural law of the universe. People have a right to free thought. They have a right to their own decisions. They have a right to their own lives. So basically... even if, I've said this before, if the House of Representatives voted 435 to nothing, if the Senate voted 100 to nothing, and if the President signed it into law, and if all the states had ratified it, about basically repealing the First Amendment, that law would not be valid because the First Amendment does not grant us the right to free speech or freedom of religion. The First Amendment simply says that the government cannot limit it. So if they say, no, the government can limit it, it's not a legitimate government anymore. So I just had to throw that in there because, see, this is the thing that really concerns me. when we talk about this, this is a really important point. I wish I'd put this a little bit earlier. When the left tells us that that those of us that want to fight this narrative of radical Islam, they think that if they report that this was a Muslim massacre, because CNN had 15 paragraphs on it, and they said gunmen, extremists. They didn't say anything about Muslims, because the left believes that if they say Muslims, that the right is going to go into every single house in America and pull Muslim children out of the streets, out of their schools, and beat them to death with bricks. That's what they think we want to do. And they say, well, if you're going to fight Islam, then you're basically going to punish all of the innocent Muslims in America, and you're just going to intimidate them and try and kill them. So let me just make a very simple historical point that's actually extremely easy, so easy to understand, even a liberal can understand it, okay? It wasn't too long ago where we fought a conflict, which you may have heard called World War II. And in World War II, we fought against Germany. Now, most of the Germans were not members of the Nazi Party. It was only about 7% of the German population was a member of the Nazi Party, but we had to fight them, and we did. And the more important point here is that when we fought World War II, there were huge numbers, millions, tens of millions of American citizens who were German descent, first-generation German, naturalized German citizens, and we didn't go into every single house in the country and kill every single German American. The patron saint of the liberals, that the God who descended from the earth, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, decided to inter Japanese citizens who had done nothing wrong whatsoever. He decided to put them into concentration camps when they were American citizens and they were as patriotic as anybody else. And so we didn't go through the country and kill every single Japanese person in the country because we were at war with Japan. And we didn't have to kill every single Italian in America to go fight the Italians and fight Mussolini. So this idea that because we're going to go and fight these radicals means that we're suddenly going to just beat the daylights out of or expel or murder all of the domestic Muslims is just plain bullshit, frankly. It's just not true. And it's typical of the left to try to take these kind of arguments and turn them into this sort of thing where it's just ridiculous. Likewise, you're hearing, well, back during 1939, most Americans didn't want to admit Jewish immigrants either. That's true. Once again, the patron saint of the liberals, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, turned this boatload of Jews away, and they're saying, see, it's the same thing with the Syrians. You people are just so xenophobic. There's a few differences here, obviously. The first difference, of course, is that the Jews that were turned away in 1939 were not at war with America. They weren't blowing up American bases. These Jews that were trying to escape from Germany weren't massacring Americans everywhere they saw them. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is these people were basically Westerners. They were people who understood Western culture. They were not antithetical to Western culture. You can't compare the two things. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's nuts. So, where was I? Is religion a religion of peace? Yes, it's a religion of peace if you're Islamic. If you're not, you're going to be fought. And as I said, they're at war everywhere, right? They're at war everywhere. We're not at war with Buddhists. We're not at war with Confucians. We're not at war with animists in Africa. We're not at war with the Jews. We're not at war with atheists in China. We're not at war with, pick one. We're not at war with anybody. But Islam is at war with all of them at the same time. That's a data point.